All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday night live stream. I'm honored to have Jacob here with me. It has been a lifelong dream of mine to sit and debate Scripture on a live stream with Jacob Mayfield, and we get to do it tonight.
That's it.
So welcome. Hopefully you're having a great day, and we're excited to take a moment out of our day to dive into Scripture. Now, if you recall, for the last few weeks, if you've been tuning in, we have been working through the writings of John, the letters of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and also Jude. And one thing that we identified that challenged us on was our knowledge of some of the Old Testament Scripture. So both John and his writings and Jude harken back as examples to events with people like Balaam, excuse me.
And a fan favorite.
Yeah. And we looked last week, if you tuned in, or it's posted if you want to go watch it, we looked at angels. Because Jude talks about angels falling, and we explored that a little bit because it's not something we talk about very often. And so tonight we're going to look at Cain and Abel and their interaction and what all happened with them. We take this both from Jude and also from 1 John. So as a way of reminder, real quick, in Jude, we see in talking about, if you recall, Jude is talking about false teachers coming into the church, and he's warning the church on how to handle such. He says of these false teachers, verse 10 of Jude, he says, "But these speak evil of whatever they do not know, and whatever they know naturally, like brute beasts, in these things they corrupt themselves." And so now he's going to give examples. He says, "Woe to them, for they have gone in the way of Cain. They have run greedily in the error of Balaam for profit, and perished in the rebellion of Korah." And so right here, Jude is holding up Cain as having behaved in much the same way that these false teachers do. And then also we wanted to note, before we jump to Genesis chapter 4, to look at the story of Cain and Abel, we wanted to note that in 1 John, we'll start with verse 10. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 10 says, "In this the children of God and the children of the devil are manifest." So John's saying this is the way you'll know who's of God and who's of Satan. He says, "Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is he who does not love his brother." That's kind of a little, you don't love your brother. We're about to talk about Cain and Abel.
Yeah.
It says in verse 11, "For this is the message that you heard from the beginning, that we should love one another, not as Cain, who was of the wicked one and murdered his brother." And why did he murder him? Here's the question posed: because his works were evil and his brothers were righteous. So we're going to talk about that, the evil and the righteous works of Cain tonight. So if you would travel with us to Genesis chapter 4.
Yeah, and I think that phrase is, every time we study Cain and Abel, we go straight to Cain killed Abel. And as a kid, that's really all you care about, right? That's what you're taught in Bible class. That's what you learn. But it's interesting how many people in the New Testament reference back to Cain and the relationship he had. So there's got to be more leading up to this. Cain went crazy and killed Abel. There's more to it. There's more to us to understand and learn from what actually happened. So I think you were going to grab.
And now the rest of the story.
That's right.
There's more to it. So we're going to be in Genesis chapter 4 is where we find this recorded for us. Unfortunately, like many things in Scripture, the recording of this event leaves you wanting some more.
Yeah.
There wasn't a 14-page exposition of what happened. We just get a few snippets. And being a sin of this magnitude, or by our standards, murdering your brother, we'd like to know a little more. But we're going to have to work with. So Genesis chapter 4, verse 1 says, "Now Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain. And she said, I have acquired a man from the Lord." Those of you who are having children, maybe you're having boys, this is what you need to yell out when you're in the delivery room. "I have acquired a man."
Acquired a man.
"Then she bore again, and this time his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain was a tiller of the ground." Now this is when we start to get some detail about what happened. Verse 3, "And in the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought an offering of the fruit of the ground to the Lord. Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat, and the Lord respected Abel and his offering. But he did not respect Cain and his offering. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell." So we're going to stop there. We're going to talk about verses 3 through 5 real quick. So the thing that I pulled that was most interesting out of that series of verses right away was it says, "in the process of time." Moses records for us. He doesn't tell us that God came and said, "Hey, I want you to start offering of what I blessed you with. It just says in the process of time, Cain gave an offering. He gave an offering of the thing that he did, and that was a tiller of the ground. And Abel gave an offering of what it was he was responsible for, and that was the keeper of the animals.
Yeah, and it doesn't tell us if they even chose which one did which. It doesn't give us that information of, did Cain choose to be a tiller of the ground? We just know that's what they did. I mean, that's simply the way it was. And so when you lead up to this, where it's time for this offering, and I think this is probably where you're going to go, is we don't even know how they knew to give an offering, right?
No,
like it doesn't tell us anything if God asked for this, which and I may be jumping ahead of you, Jake, but
go ahead, jump.
It's hard to look at that whenever you see, Hebrews 11, when we talk about, the heroes of faith. All we get from Abel that he did, right? Abel's listed just a couple of times. He's listed as someone who tended his sheep of the flock, right? That he gave his firstlings and the fat portions. And then the next thing we see Abel, the only other thing is he's getting killed. But yet he's made the hall of faith of being a very faithful person.
Yep.
Right?
So we're going to read that real quick, what Jacob's talking about. This is Hebrews 11, and in verse 4, the Hebrew writer says, by faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it he, being dead, still speaks. And when we started talking about this lesson for tonight, I told Jacob, I said, I'm not really sure where the faith piece for Abel is mixed in, because we don't have the backstory. We don't know what it was that God told he and Cain, and where Abel was putting his faith, other than that he was giving of the first fruits of his flock.
How many verses was that? Just reading through that talked about Abel. Was that just one verse, or was that a couple?
You talking about in Hebrews or in
Hebrews?
Yeah, just one.
Just one. But it's a little bit of a long verse. And it's interesting. Abel gets that. I mean, you read for a little while. And then you got people like Joseph and his faith, and he's got one little thing about his bones.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. He gave orders about his bones. So, I mean, it just kind of tells you the Hebrew writer viewed Abel and his faith as something so great. And so I think that's something that's really important. And when we read in Genesis, having the hindsight of seeing, hey, what Abel did here was actually showing a lot of faith. We may not understand how it showed a lot of faith just from reading these few verses, but what we can know is it showed a lot of faith.
Yeah.
And how he did that.
Yeah, it's an excellent point that Hebrews 11 spends a whole verse on a guy who was only alive for 4 verses of our narrative in Genesis.
Yeah.
Thanks to his wonderful brother. Also, one thing too, and Jacob pointed this out as we were preparing for this lesson, we often read this through the lens of, we know what God ultimately instructed of his children, and that was the sacrifices that they made and being of the first of the flock and those that were unblemished. And we don't know if that's what God expected at that point. It's hard to tell if Cain's sacrifice was unacceptable because it was of the fruit of the ground and not of the livestock, or if it was unacceptable more because of his attitude with which he brought the offering. And we're going to see a little bit about his attitude as we keep reading. So let's keep going in Genesis chapter 4. We're back there. And we're going to look at the interaction with God and Cain. He says in verse 6, so the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it. In typing my notes, I made a little note here that this conversation sounds a lot like one that I have with my kids. I'm sure Jacob has had some of these as well. The kids do something that, in my 32-year-old mind, I'm like, this is obviously wrong, but they're kids, they don't necessarily know. And so we sit down and we say, okay, this behavior leads to this result. This behavior is going to be followed by this consequence. What does God say? God says, Cain, why are you upset? He says, do you not know that if you do well, you'll be accepted? He says, look, you just have to do what is appropriate. And so this gives us an insight that God has, at this point, at the very least, provided some instruction. God's not going to tell Cain, hey, Cain, if you do well, you'll be fine, without telling him what well is. The same way that I'm not going to come down hard on my children for doing something if I've not set a rule and said, hey, this is acceptable, this is not.
And we know that because God never does that. God never just assumes. I mean, he spent so much time making sure we would understand. You know, he would send person after person after person to let people know, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. We know God's not one to just say, well, you should have known that. That's not what God does. He doesn't say you should have known. He tells you what you should know. So, I mean, there's no way to infer here that Cain didn't understand what he was supposed to be doing.
Right. Yeah. God, and if Cain had a misunderstanding before with his offering, God has come and he has level set everything. He has put he and Abel on a level playing ground. He says, Cain, here's what I expect. And that's a little bit about what's discouraging about what comes next, is that he had this direct line with God. And I got to thinking about that and looking through this. I cannot imagine what it's like for God to come talk to me and express him being upset with something that I've done. We probably would not find that to be a pleasant interaction. I don't know. I hate to say that about talking to God, but I know the things that I've done in my life and how much the word convicts me. And here Cain is talking directly to God. And we might say, well, Cain has every advantage because, he's talking to God. But at the same time, we have every advantage because we get to read the whole story.
Right.
Cain is one point in time, and God's saying, look, Cain, I need you to trust me, right? This act, this offering was counted to Abel as righteousness, his faith in this act. And God's saying to Cain, you got to trust me. Yeah. If you do these things, you will be found in favor. If you do not do these things, sin will be crouching at the door.
Which might even speak to the point of why Abel was such a man of faith, right? Because you got to look there at the beginning here. There's so much that's going to happen after this, that they're really referencing not a lot, It's Adam and Eve, and then they come, and then that's what they're basing off their information from what God has said to those people. They don't have the centuries of figuring this out, right? They've got faith going off of just what's right there in front of them.
I mean, as the narrative was recorded for us, it's not until the end of this chapter, which is when Seth comes, that it says that Moses records for us. This is verse 26. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord.
Yeah,
and that's a discussion for a whole nother day.
Right.
But this is the very early stages of God's interaction with man and him setting forth his expectations, at least, again, from what we're provided for reference.
But doesn't it kind of speak back, and I don't want to jump back too far, but when you talked about angels last week, and that angels had knowledge, right? They had the knowledge. Cain was able to speak to God in the same way that angels were able to see the presence of God, but there's still something of that pride and that wanting to take ownership for yourself that even in the face of God allows you to do, which we haven't got there yet, but what Cain is about to do. The reason Jake's focusing so much here is because it's really important to understand that what has just happened is after Cain gets frustrated with it, God speaks to him directly about what's frustrating him and explains to him, as you said, you do with your kids, he explains to him why he got the reaction he got. And I don't know, it says that he didn't find favor. It doesn't really say he was rebuked by God at that point. He didn't get rebuked by God until his face fell or his countenance fell, until he started moping pretty much about it.
Yep.
And so Cain has direct interaction with God before he does what we know him for, right?
And Jacob used a good word there in reference to the angels. It seems like pride, right? When we read what happened to Cain, and we're gonna spoiler alert, here's what happens in the story, right? If you're not sure, you're not sure the next part, we stopped reading. Verse 8, Genesis chapter 4. Now Cain talked with Abel his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. Now it's hard for me to read that and not take away pride as a big driver in this,
right?
Because what did Cain know? Cain knew the expectation. He knew that his sacrifice didn't meet the expectation, and he knew that his brothers did. We're not told what they talked about. I'd love to know what that conversation looked like.
Yeah.
But it seems like pride played a big role in this for Cain. That for whatever reason his pride was hurt, and instead of taking God's instruction that he just got in this one-on-one interaction and following it and being more like his brother and his offering, instead he chose to take his pride issue, his anger out on his brother, and unfortunately we have record of the first murder that we find in Scripture.
Jake, I don't know about you, but when I read that, and this is just maybe kind of where we are today, when you read that, it just kind of, I often have this thought of wanting to be there. I'm like, Abel had to say something, right? Abel had to trigger him somehow. Like we just assume, because we don't think, and maybe it's because we relate to Cain in our anger sometimes and not understanding, even though Cain had full understanding. And many times when we throw those fits, we have full understanding. But we're not told anything of Abel except for that he was righteous and that he was doing what he was supposed to do. We have no reason to think that Abel did anything to deserve this. Actually, we know he did. So, but I feel like sometimes we try to go there, right? We try to get to that place where, why would Cain do this? We try to justify things for Cain of why he would do this. And sometimes it's just shows you how powerful your own self can be in moments.
And you have to wonder, what was the pretense in which Cain approached Abel, right? Because all we're told is they talked and they were in the field and Cain killed him. Did Cain come up to Abel and he was angry initially because of the feedback he got from God? Did Cain become angry through the course of the conversation? Again, this is one of those things that I would have loved to have either seen them talk about or ask Moses, hey, why did you write it this way?
But in my mind, it goes to Cain wanted to blame Abel for him getting in trouble. He's like, little goody two-shoes over here. And you see that. That's what people do. When people get in trouble and someone else get praises, they don't blame themselves for what they did wrong. They blame him for being good. Like, how much sense does that make? But it's something that continues to go on today. And Cain is just so caught up in himself that he can't even, as God is telling him what you're doing wrong, you need to stop doing things this way. Do the work and you'll get the praise. Do what you're supposed to do and you'll get the praise. He says, no, I need to change Abel to look more like me in order to fix this situation. I don't need to look more like him.
Yep.
And maybe that's an older brother thing. I don't know.
You would know more about that than I. You at least have one to look up to. I've got an older sister who I love, by the way. Holly, I love you.
We'll call it that. But yeah, we're both younger siblings, so I guess we don't have that knowledge. But there, you see Cain here in his just not taking any responsibility for himself and solely putting it all on Abel. Even though God told him exactly what he needed to do to fix it.
Yep. To me, as we move forward to this text, so I've always thought that the most interesting part of the story of Jonah is chapter 4, right, with the gourd and him having the pity party. This next part of the Cain and Abel narrative is my favorite, and it's because of the reaction that Cain has and then the reaction God has to Cain.
Yeah.
So we'll pick it back up in verse 9. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? So it's interesting that, again, they have this open dialogue back and forth, and Cain chooses to lie. Maybe we look the same way to God whenever we lie about things in our own lives. But he looks at God and says, oh, God, I don't know. It's that famous line, am I my brother's keeper? One of the biggest cop-out lines that people use today, right, is from this narrative. Says, am I my brother's keeper, God? And he says, what have you done? God speaking to Cain. The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. So now you are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood by your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you shall be on the earth. God is punishing Cain by taking the thing that made Cain Cain. I mean, what are we told about these individuals? He was born first, and he was a tiller of the ground. Those are the characteristics we know about Cain, and he killed his brother. God's taken away his identity. He says, look, the ground that accepted your brother's blood is not going to give its fruit to you anymore. But it's interesting, Cain's reaction. Again, I'm sure God is looking at us and saying, y'all did the same thing.
Yeah.
In verse 13, Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Now, here is a man who just killed his brother.
And is so not aware enough to think that God already knows what he did. Or he just doesn't care.
Yeah.
When he makes that statement, am I my brother's keeper? You don't think in his knowledge of who God is, we're not that removed from them being created, right? For him to be like, well, obviously I can hide this from God. Same way, Adam.
Mom and dad?
Yeah. Wonder where he gets it from, right? But that he can say, I don't know. That's not my responsibility. Whenever, in fact, where his brother is exactly his responsibility at that point. Because he's the reason his brother is where he's at.
Mm-hmm.
And to listen to that and then get called on it and not be, asking for pity of like, oh, I'm so sorry. How can I make this right? It's like, that's pretty steep.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty steep, God. That punishment's just a little too much.
Yeah,
Can you rework that?
Yeah.
How unaware does Cain seem here? But, like you said, God must look at us so many times of saying, who are you talking? What are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Look at what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And here to me is the next few verses are the best takeaway from this entire interaction, this entire story. And it's because it's a great testament to the grace that God has and the love he has for us. So we've got Cain who just killed his brother. He just lied about it, right? It's when you find your kid with cookies all around their mouth. Did you eat a cookie? No, didn't. And Cain says, I can't handle this punishment. It's too much for me. And we see verse 14. Surely you have driven me out this day from the face of the ground. I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth. And it will happen that anyone who finds me will kill me. And we'll get back to that line in a minute. And the Lord said to him, verse 15, therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark on Cain, lest anyone finding him should kill him. Now, think about God's grace in this moment. He has every reason to come down on Cain so hard. I mean, he could say, look, Cain, I don't necessarily care if somebody kills you because you killed your brother. That's what got you into this place to begin with. And Cain's obviously worried that news of what he has done is going to get out. And people are going to find him and they're going to punish him for it. They're going to take justice into their own hands. And God says, it won't be so. And he puts this mark, we're not told what it is, but he puts a mark on Cain so that anybody who sees Cain knows, I've got to stay away from that guy because if I do something to him, sevenfold, right? Yeah. There's that instance of the number 7. Sevenfold punishment to anybody who does anything to Cain to punish him. Now, again, this is a great testament to God's grace. God is punishing Cain, right? We talked about it. He's taken away Cain's identity, really. Not only his identity, it's his way to feed himself and his family.
Yeah.
He at this point, who knows, he's built a great knowledge of how to cultivate the earth and grow fruits and vegetables. And God's taking that away from him because the earthwork's not going to do that anymore for him. But at the same time, it's a wonderful example of God's grace in that instead of God just coming down so hard on him, God's still showing him some love, still providing him a way.
And that's what's so interesting is people like to say, well, the God of the Old Testament was vengeful and mean and all this kind of things. And it wasn't until the New Testament when Jesus came down that God became this gracious, loving God. From the beginning, God hasn't changed. People have changed. And the way we view different things, I think a lot of times we get stuck in the mindset of Cain when we read about these things in the Old Testament where we just think everything's unfair. But God continually shows these people that he loves them continually and gives them chance and shows, hey, if you'll just do this, I'm not just telling you this because for me, it's for everything I do is for you. Mm-hmm. And so whenever you look at God's grace in this, where someone has just not anywhere in this has Cain deserved this treatment from God of saying, I'm going to take care of you. He cried whenever and pouted whenever he didn't get the praise from God with his offering, even though obviously it wasn't what it was supposed to be. He blames that on Abel and takes it out on Abel and kills him and doesn't take responsibility for that and says, God, it wasn't me. I don't want to know what you want me to do about it. I don't have anything to do with it. Then says, that punishment's too hard. I can't even take care of myself. How am I going to take care of myself like that? And yet he's never taken responsibility, but God still says to him, I'm going to give you grace. And that's what grace is. We don't deserve it. There's no point in really us getting it. But he says, I love you. I'm still going to take care of you. I'm still going to give you the opportunity to understand who you are and my love for you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And we're not going to follow through with the end of the chapter tonight, but if you follow through, Cain is able to go and have a wife, have children, have a lineage, all because God didn't kill him. God said, you're going to be punished and you're going to be sent away. But God still provided that grace for him, gave Cain opportunity to make the right decision, to learn from his mistakes, and to serve God for the rest of his life. Now, with the last few minutes that we have left, Jacob and I love a good thought exercise. Our relationship has been typified by arguments over things that we can in no way prove, but we just like to talk about.
Sure.
A takeaway from this story that I've had for years and many, many people have wrestled with is what's recorded for us in verse 14. So look at verse 14 again, right? So this is Cain complaining. And he says, this is the middle part of the 14, I will be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth, and it will happen that anyone who finds me will kill me. The question we have is, who is anyone? Because as is recorded for us at this point, there's his parents and him and his brother who he just killed. It's not recorded that he has any kids. It's recorded later that he has a family.
Mm-hmm.
It's not recorded for us that Abel has a lineage, so that he has any kids out there. It's not recorded that there are any other children attributed to Adam and Eve. They're going to have Seth.
Because it says Seth has replaced Abel.
Right. And that's actually where his name is derived from, right?
Yeah.
Because Eve is excited that her son was replaced. So who is it that's going to kill Cain?
Yeah, I had to catch myself for a second. I thought we were going to have the Bill Russell, Michael Jordan debate.
Oh,
so,
right, yeah.
No,
Bill Russell's a great player. You're wondering. Documentary to come.
That's right. There's a lot of different things, and some people think that maybe this has been so many years, we don't understand the amount of years that population somehow could have been given because of it's been hundreds or maybe even thousands of years that they've been living on Earth. I don't know. I mean, that's kind of hard to grasp since we have nothing that tells us that. There's another thing where it says maybe Cain is scared of people that are gonna come eventually.
Yeah.
Like we know people
Cain
are gonna
understands
come.
that he's seen his parents live a long time at this point. So maybe he's thinking, okay, well, there are going to be more to come along in the future, and I'm worried about them, not necessarily people who are around right now. The other theory that I like quite a bit, did God create other people?
Yeah.
Right? It's recorded for us, this lineage. It's recorded that God created Adam and Eve, and from that we get Seth, and from on down to Jesus. Did God populate the earth through other means with other people? What lends credence to that argument is Cain's worried about other people.
Yeah. And I guess a rebuke to that could be Cain is so unaware of what's going on around him that could he just not realize that there aren't people out there?
Yeah.
Like he just thinks, he hasn't been paying attention enough that they're the only ones there. And so maybe he just thinks that there's more people out there that there's actually not.
Mm-hmm.
But there's these theories. I like the one that's actually one me and Jake kind of agree upon, I guess, a little bit more is the idea that could God have created more people? We're given this story in the Genesis account of the lineage to Jesus and understanding how we get to Jesus. That was the purpose of Moses writing that, telling the story of God and the deliverance of his people. So there's nothing that tells us that there were, but there's also nothing that tells us that there wasn't.
That's right. And if you're thinking, well, that's a little bit far-fetched, probably next week, we're going to start to talk about the Nephilim.
Yeah, fun stuff.
If you're not familiar with the Nephilim, read ahead, Genesis chapter 5, and we'll get into that a little bit along with some other pre-flood events that start kind of pointing to the plan being salvation through Jesus on the cross.
And I think that, sometimes it's fun to have those conversations and we can get caught up in looking at, who was Cain scared of? Obviously, Moses didn't think it was that important for us to have that information. Mm-hmm. He wrote us what we needed to know. And so what I think Moses giving this information and John and Jude building off of the information they were given by Moses goes back to 1 John 3. And that the point of this story is that we're supposed to love each other and not be like the one who didn't love the people around them. Mm-hmm. So while the debate is fun about where these people, I think it's really important for us to always come down to understanding, well, Moses did give us this information for a reason. John did reference it for a reason. Jude did reference it for a reason. And it's because we need to know, the Hebrew writer, we need to know what it looks like of how you're supposed to treat God and in turn treat each other.
Yep, well said. And with that, we thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Please share this recording if you're watching it later with other people. Let people have an opportunity to study the Bible along with us. If you got any feedback, please let us know. We're kind of working our way through this as we go, so we welcome feedback. And again, as is said every Sunday and Wednesday, if you have a need, please make it known. Please let us know, let the elders know, let someone else from the congregation know that we might be able to work to fill that need, whatever it may be.
If you were wondering if the Kids Connection was going to happen tonight, it will be posted at some point this week. Daniel and I will get together and make that video. We had some, obviously, it's no secret, we've had some technical difficulties the past 2 weeks. We are getting those fixed. If you tried to watch this morning and you weren't able to, we did get the stream going a little later on. Both the 8 o'clock service, which it wasn't the full thing, we kind of got in there halfway. But the full 10 o'clock service is also on the YouTube channel right now that you can go and watch. And it was a good recording, no glitches. So it is there if you need to do that.
Good. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful week. We love you, and we'll see you soon.
Love you guys.